some big questions which have been asked in the ocean about the ocean for a number of years. If we go back a step into the birth of marine science, it really started with the Challenger expeditions, which began in 1872. So next year will be 150-year anniversary of those incredible expeditions. But in more recent years, there was something called the Census of Marine Life, which looked to, it was a massive 10-year international effort to assess the diversity, distribution, abundance of marine life. So a big question asked there. We've got something called GEBCO Seabed 2030 now, which is looking to map the ocean seabed. So we were looking for a question, and the question we came up with was, can we sequence the ocean genome for the common good? Would that be possible, and would that create the step change that we need in our understanding of the ocean, and also to help in its protection? It actually represents over 99% of our biosphere where there is life on our planet. Full ocean depth is nearly 11,000 meters down. The average depth of the ocean is 4,000 meters. So if you think about that three-dimensional environment compared to what we have on land, which is a few hundred feet above the surface, this is where we have the majority of life on our planet. Yes, it covers 70%, just over 70% of the surface of our planet, but it's that three dimensions which is interesting. And then you have these different zones, these different depths of the ocean, which are demarcated by zones, where you have the different amounts of light which can come through. So you have the beginning, the mesophotic light, the mesophotic zone, into the rarophotic zone, which is an area we helped to discover, which is 130 meters down to about 300 meters. Which is the rare light zone, and you get deeper down into the twilight zone, and then the abyssal zone, midnight zone, the abyssal zone, and then finally the hadal zone, which is 6,000 to 11,000 meters down.
The genome really means, because in a way, if you have the DNA of the widest point of the pyramid, you're really going to understand everything else that rests on top of it. Is that a reasonable sort of a very simplistic description of where we're heading?
Yes, I mean, if we look at the Darwin tree of life, for example, and we look at the phylum that exists on our planet, there are 34 phyla on the planet, 33 of them live in the ocean, and 12 are on land. So there is a bit of crossover. But if you go back to kind of our evolutionary heritage on our planet, it was formed 4.4 billion years ago. Life on our planet, life in the ocean began about 3.7 billion years ago, which is 3 times longer than we have on land, which is why when we look at the tree of life, we've got the vast majority of our biodiversity and our genetic diversity, we imagine, will be found in the ocean. The ocean genome essentially is the genetic code, if you like, of all marine organisms which live in the ocean, and it's the foundation upon which all marine ecosystems fundamentally rest, including their functionality, their productivity, and their resilience. And so within that space, we've also got what's called marine genetic resources. And these collectively support our global food security through fishing and agriculture, human well-being, sustainable ocean and planet. And I'll get into a lot more detail about what that actually means in a moment. But one of the great challenges we face with the ocean genome is that it's being degraded and eroded through all the stories many of us have heard already, through over-exploitation, predominantly through fishing. I mean, the single biggest impact that we are having on our ocean at the moment is fishing. But the other areas which are causing the ocean genome to be degraded and eroded is habitat loss. We've got those pollutions, we've got impacts from climate change, of course, invasive species, and a whole host of other pressures. If we look just through the prism of climate change, we're expected to see there'll be disproportionate levels of species loss in the ocean compared to land, and that's due to a narrow thermal range in which marine organisms need to exist. Yeah. So we're kind of faced with the big conclusion, really, is that ecosystem collapse on our global scale is a very real possibility. And the key thing that can be done to address that, one of the many things that can be done, is these marine protected areas at an ecosystem scale. And the goal at which people are aiming for at the moment is 30%, at least 30% of the global ocean by 2030. Currently, we've got about 2.5% protected, or highly protected. There's about 8-9% which is protected, but only 2.5% which is really protected.
And that's really. And is that and who makes those rules? I mean, what's the driver for that?
Well, when we come to sort of the governance piece of it, it's of the ocean genome, and in fact the ocean, it's pretty complex. I mean, we have what's called the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, and that kind of acts as a form of constitution, if you like, for the ocean. It specifies provisions for the protection of the marine environment. If you go within national jurisdiction, which is up to 200 miles offshore, which is our exclusive economic zones, then we have a range of other things which can be deployed in this instance, such as the Convention of Biological Diversity, the CBD, which is meeting this year to set new targets. They haven't met any of their targets yet, so we're hoping they're going to set some new ones. There's something called the Nagoya Protocol. There's the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, World Intellectual Property Organization, of course. There are a whole range of things. So once you get into the areas beyond national jurisdiction, you're into the high seas. And under the UN Law of the Sea, under UNCLOS as it's called, that's defined to be owned by the people of the planet, by you and I. That roughly makes about 64% of the ocean. But critically, there's no restrictions there on access to genetic resources or regulations for the sharing of benefits from the ocean based on potential commercialization or other things. So it's the Wild West out there at the moment.
Interesting. And so there's quite a clear picture, and I suppose we've got two questions off of that. So there's quite a clear picture that along the inshore waters, 200 miles, economies, so governments who've got vested interest in the success of their economies, which could be tourism or agriculture or commerce, would have a vested interest in keeping, if you like, the marine life sacrosanct as much as they can control that small area. But outside of that, you've got a different picture where 64% of the world is really yet to sort of have an architecture put on it.
Yes, and there's a big discussion going away, negotiation going away called on the United Nations and biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, the BBNJ negotiations as it's called. And we hope that we're going to see some results from that this year. But it's been in the works for a few years and we haven't seen anything come from it. We've also got something called the International Seabed Authority, which is a quasi-UN agency which is responsible for the management of the seabed, even the seabed in the high seas. And they're carving the seabed up for mineral exploitation and issuing licenses to that effect, even in the high seas. So what's interesting is if you're a shrimp and you're living on the bottom of the sea and you're on the seabed, you're governed by the International Seabed Authority. But if you jump into the water column by an inch, you're then in the high seas where there's no jurisdiction. So,
of course, commerce is a two-edged sword, really, isn't it? Because I think some of the solutions you sense might come out of commerce, but also some of the real problems. I mean, as soon as you say kind of like carved up for mineral assets, you immediately sort of think, well, profit is going to thrive over environment in the pursuit of whatever rare mineral it is we need today. But not paint too gloomy a picture, but let's a realistic picture. I mean, what sort of impediments are there, or should we not be concerned?
No, I think we need to be. I mean, we need to value our natural capital in profound new ways. We need a financial infrastructure to be able to support that as well. So no, there's a lot which is unknown that needs to be changed if we're going to have a sustainable pathway for humanity on our planet. I think.
I mean, I suppose in a way it's reassuring to hear that there are so many acronyms going out there and bodies, governing bodies in place. I mean, again, because of probably like a lot of people here, we're sort of learning from you, learning quite hard about what's sort of in place at the moment. And awareness is such a fascinating thing. So the assets that we would understand, so we touched on fishery, so we touched on the commerce of that, we touched on basic drilling. Is there any other sort of, so one's food and sustenance and one's sort of manufacturing, right? But is there any other part of sort of the sort of biosphere that kind of we haven't really appreciated yet?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. If we look at, if we go back to the ocean genome and we look at what its uses are to us, there's two bits to it really. There's the ecological benefits of marine genetic diversity, and which is fundamental to the ecosystem services that we need to survive on our planet. And there are two parts to that. One is that the marine genetic diversity helps to stabilize our ecosystems, our species, and their whole ecological processes. And they provide a whole range of services which we as humanity need, including carbon cycling, providing food, maintaining water quality, regulating climate. And the heart of that is the marine genetic diversity that enables that. It's also that marine genetic diversity in the ocean strengthens its resilience to climate change, because with the biological variability and the genetic potential of all those different ocean organisms that we have, that allows species to persist in a whole range of different changing environmental conditions, and then adapt to whatever different ecological niches they need. So those are, that's one piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle is actually looking at it from a human, from society's point of view, and what are the benefits of marine genetic resources for us. And what we see is that marine organisms have evolved to thrive in extremes of pressure, extremes of temperature, chemistry, and of course darkness. And the impact of that is that they produce a vast diversity of metabolites, which have high levels of bioactivity that can be harnessed in marine technology. So what does that really mean in practice? Well, it means that we've so far discovered about 35,000 marine natural products from those marine organisms. And some of them are ranged from pharmaceuticals to nutraceuticals to bulk chemicals. Just zeroing in on pharmaceuticals, for example, the rates of drug discovery from marine organisms are 2.5 times the industry average. If we look at where we are now with COVID, remdesivir is the first approved drug to treat COVID-19, and that has been developed from sea sponges. We've got other clinically approved drugs for treatments for HIV, for cancers and pain and cardiovascular diseases already, and many more in the pipeline. The diagnostic tests for COVID and other pandemics like AIDS and SARS have been developed from enzymes from microbes found on hydrothermal vents down in the seabed. And then you've even got sort of the red algae, which exists in the Canaries around where I am, and that was used to fight the coronavirus MERS. So that's just sort of looking at it from a farmer point of view. And you can go deeper into biomedical science and biotech of squid and how that's helped our understanding of our nervous systems, horseshoe crabs and fertilization, on and on it goes. That's just pharmaceuticals. So we go on to something like nutraceuticals, for example, the bioactive chemicals that we see there. That includes vitamins, carbohydrates, proteins, and all sorts of things, which can be used to treat inflammatory conditions, cardiovascular diseases, and others to prevent UV radiation and skin restoratives. Then you've got your bulk chemicals. You've got your stuff which you can make bioplastics from, for example, or seaweed that can go into probiotics, which can go into animal feed. And so if we feed cows these probiotics from algae, we can reduce methane emissions by over 50%. So why aren't more cows eating seaweed? It's something which I imagine we're going to see in the future. Sustainable bioplastics for packaging, straws, flip-flops, on and on you go. So the big picture of it is marine biotechnology, really, and that's based on the ocean genome or marine genetic resources, and it's got the potential here to meet the global needs which we have, whether it's food, our feed, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, biomaterials, and even energy. And currently, marine biotech is only 1% of the global market, so there's a huge of the biotech market. So there's a vast opportunity which marine genetic resources represent for humanity.
It sounds to me rightly that you're taking the scientist's point of view that if you like, the moral course comes later. So the science of study and inquiry comes first, and then the sort of moral question as to whether it's right or wrong in terms of the species or environment sits on top of that.
There are very important sort of moral and ethical questions around science and a lack of diversity that exists in this space at the moment, because the majority of biodiversity and sampling is being conducted by high-income nations, but most often not in their own waters. When it comes to the work around the ocean genome, for example, and biodiscovery, there are 10 countries which are really leading the way. They're not going to be very, very surprised to most people. United States, UK, France, Australia, Canada, Japan, Germany, China, and Russia. They've got the field research and sampling capacities, the technology that's needed, the molecular expertise, the finance and the legal expertise to really push these things forward. And if you just go into, from an IP point of view, onto it, 98% of patents I've discovered are cite marine genes that have originated from those 10 countries. And there's one company, a single corporation, BASF, which has registered 47% of all marine sequences, including gene patents. So one company owns 47% of all marine gene patents, which is just quite extraordinary. That's the kind of the disparity which is at the moment, which we need to really overcome if we're going to try and sequence the ocean genome for the common good. It's a critical area which can and must be addressed. It can be done through, the disparity is obviously there because of the cost of sampling, the technology, and it can be addressed through both non-monetary benefits, knowledge exchange, data sharing, but also technology transfer, the more monetary side of it, and research funding and payment on the point of the commercialization. So all these things need to happen if we really want to try and harness the value of the ocean genome for the common good.
So it sounds to me like we've got two questions running here, or two hairs running in the conversation. One is the question about conservation, your concern about the loss of variants. I think that, and if you like, things going extinct not even being known to have existed, and the kind of working steps towards that, of getting towards 35% of the marine life protected. And I'd like to come back to that in a moment. And then this sequencing the genome, which I'm really interested by. I mean, I think just to tease it out, that is basically to understand the DNA of what makes an organism, isn't it? I mean, we're basically breaking down the proteins. Is that correct?
Yes, you get to the point where we've got digital sequence information, it's noughts and ones, and you can do something with it. But
whatever you want. And
there's a piece of it which is the biodiscovery side of it, first of all, which is finding out what's there, and then the biochemistry, which is the application of it, and its onward utilization in pharmaceutical, nutraceutical, biochemicals, probiotic, all those kind of other aspects, which is in the biochemical piece of it. But the journey, where we are now, which is very positive, is that that pipeline from sample through to sequencing and the curation of those marine organisms and the marine genetic data, the bioinformatics which needs to go on for the genomic assembly piece of the puzzle as well, it is all there, plus the onward utilization. However, there's not really a transparent, sustainable supply chain for the marine biotech sector at the moment. Because
exactly. So I wanted to just tease it out. I mean, I suppose it's like not having the wit to describe in other ways. I'd only use context that I would understand and things that happened in the past. But so, for example, are we in a situation where it's affected like the internet, where on the one hand you've got a platform you've created, to use the words of the creator, this is for everyone, and then suddenly you've got these incredible technological companies who basically commandeered it and actually turn it around to being, arguably not for everyone, to the degree where they can turn off someone's Twitter handle just because they don't like what they're saying. So it's not for everyone. So are we in that potential territory with this? Is that one of your causes that's running here?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's where we are at the moment. There is a massive lack of massive disparity in who can sequence the ocean genome, as we see in other areas of biotechnology. So it's a key thing that needs to be challenged. But there is existing infrastructure which is in place. If we look at the UK, with the Sanger Wellcome Institute, for example, and their leadership in sequencing genomes, but very high quality reference genomes. Of their goal is to do that for all life on the planet, with the Earth Biogenome Project. So there are major international collaborations underway to sequence the ocean genome, but the onward utilization of it and the access to that critical data needs to be sorted out.
That's really interesting. So I wondered if we might leave that question hanging for a second, because I know someone's asked here about intellectual property, which I think we sort of covered. We'll come back to, but I suppose the question there is about this environment. I'm very interested in this idea that we have the capacity or the will to say that we're going to conserve this body of land. I mean, what is the evidence so far on 2.5% that has been secured, if you like, that this is a good track, that we're on the right track with it? What exactly is going on with it?
Well, I mean, there's a scientific consensus that we need to protect at least 30% of the global ocean, and as I say, 2.5% is highly protected, 8 to 9% is otherwise protected as well. So, there's lots of very important reasons why we need to protect the ocean. It provides the ability for, if we look at fish, for example, and fish stocks, they don't appreciate geographic boundaries. So we need to identify where the critical nurseries are if we want to have sustainable fisheries, protect those nurseries, and then there's naturally a spill out which can support sustainable nurseries. Understand where the critical ecosystem service value is of the ocean, whether it's through carbon cycling, the role which seagrass beds and mangroves have in carbon sequestration is fundamental for us. So those areas need to be conserved. So there's lots of different reasons how and why we need to conserve, both from an environmental, but also for those sort of those environmental returns. But there's also economic reasons and social reasons which we should look at as well.
Yeah, and to your mind, those steps being taken. I mean, I guess because you touched on fishing, and that seems to be sensibly and obscene mining within that. Really, what you're looking at is sort of ring fencing particular parts of the ocean where it's just a no-go zone. So it's a bit like we're going to come on to this later on in the series when we talk about rewilding. It's a theme which is very kind of like visibly described on land, where you're effectively putting things back to nature, if there's such a kind of terminology. Is that the same sort of setup as to what's being proposed underwater?
Yes, essentially. I mean, we've been working, the focus of our work is in the Indian Ocean. And the last few years we've been working in Seychelles. And Seychelles is 99% of Seychelles is below water. They're a vast ocean nation. And they've committed to, and they have now protected 30% of their ocean. So what we were doing was gathering the actionable data that they needed to inform their marine spatial planning, to identify those areas that needed to be protected and which areas can then be sustainably managed, and what those baselines are on both those counts to enable that to happen. And that's a vast area twice the size of the UK that Seychelles has now protected. And that's the kind of scale that we need. But going beyond that, it's like, well, once it's protected, how do you manage that? How do you enforce that? How do you ensure it's ongoing sustainable, it's management in an ongoing sustainable way that continues to support the Seychelles, the people and their economies, their food sources, their lives and their livelihoods.
So, I mean, could we get to a situation where, for example, we might go to Seychelles with a view to going underwater and being part of the, like a sort of, ecological tourism, I suppose, to go and see.
Absolutely, and that's a really critical part of it. If we look at the blue economy, the economic activity that's related to the ocean, there's a report which came out by the OECD recently, which stated that the single largest part of this blue economy by the end of this decade, by 2030, is going to be marine tourism. So the role of marine tourism,
aspects of the ocean genome within the UK, the Darwin Tree of Life project, which is being anchored by the Natural History Museum, and the Sanger Wellcome Institute, Wellcome Sanger Institute, are real leaders in that area. And there are a few other little pieces of it. But what we're looking to do is trying to say, right, can we coalesce these forces and create a massive global effort towards sequencing the ocean genome? That's what we're trying to achieve. And at the moment, we are starting to put that together. So we're putting together an initial concept paper, scientific paper, being co-authored by dozens of the world's leading scientists to really anchor the scientific aspects of this enormous project, and also the roadmap about how we get from here to where we ultimately need to get to. Which have been working on it for the last couple of years, particularly this last year. It's been a big push through the lockdown to coalesce these forces, and to get it to the point that we can then say, right, this is what it's going to cost for us to do, and then we can put a number to it, and then we can go out and find the funds to put it together. So at the moment, it's we're supported by some wonderful grants, but small grants from some of our philanthropic supporters. But it's going to cost hundreds of millions, if not billions, to actually do this, undertake this initiative. So at the moment, we're really just at the beginning on this journey. We're trying to understand what's needed, articulate it from a scientific point of view, understand what that roadmap is, understand what technology is going to be needed, and then create that roadmap and then start scaling up. So in terms of time frame, we hope that paper will be out in March, April time with a bit of luck. And then that will then provide the key detail that we need to be able to articulate what we need in terms of funding. And then ultimately, yeah, it's just a number. There's a hell of a lot of money out there in the world. We just got to find a way to go and get a narrative which is coming out. So yeah, there are so many reasons why.
Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, your extensive knowledge and insight into it. It was a remarkable awakening.
Thank you very much, Olly, and it's a great delight to be able to join you.